definitions for pleasure. Not you, Mike, you're too smart. Huh? You remember?
Pleasure was short-term and happiness was long-term.
Yeah, I like you.
I like you. That's that guy that knows what that Cowper's gland is about because he's heads up. So, we discussed pleasure, we discussed happiness. And the people that we have with us today are master interpreters of how that impacts our lives and what it becomes meaning. Caitlin, are you on?
Yes.
How it impacts our lives and what it is we do with this life experience, how we come to realize what's going on for each of us individually. And I give this analogy every time I introduce these two. Someone give me a definition now for the word enlightened. Anyone?
Learned.
Good. Good. Anyone else?
Possessing a knowledge or understanding that is greatly above the norm.
A heightened level, a higher level of
Self-aware.
self-awareness. So who said that? Thanks, Nate. Anyone else? Yeah.
Exposed to the truth.
Good. Yeah, all of these things. Let me give you another idea for a definition. When we grow up, in our life experience, we get negative input, don't we? Like, for instance, do you remember a time in your life where, a parent said to you, or your friend said to you, don't do that. That's wrong, you shouldn't be doing that. You're being too loud. You're being this, you're being that. Well, what is it that we interpret from that, right? We interpret from that this is the world's input about the way I should be. In other words, we start to form a picture of what it is we should be in relationship, with ourselves, the way we address the world, the way we react. So, this causes us some problems. And that is when you get this negative stuff, you don't know how to process it yet. You're too young. You're growing. So what do you do with it? You put it in a bag. And as these things come along, these little shadowy negative things, you put them in a bag. Now you have golden shadows too, but you have this bag. And by the time you're 20 years old, you got this bag. And you're carrying it around. And you don't know what to do with it, because you don't have the tools and you don't have the knowledge, which is what 101 will give you some clarity on when you get through the book. There are people in this world that help you get crap out of that bag and get rid of it. Well, might not get rid of it, but you can learn to hold it and live with it. And so there is my definition for the word enlightened or enlightenment. You're now lighter in life. You're not carrying this crap around with you. You're actually lighter. You wanted to say something?
I want to introduce our guests. Why don't you come on up? My buddy. He's my buddy.
Guess who the touchy-feely one is in the relationship?
So we have known Charlie and Linda for a lot of years, but they are quite renowned in their industry. They're both therapists, they're authors, they're international retreat facilitators, and their specialty is relationship. And in this world of relationship and therapists, they're known as the couple to come to when your marriage is at its darkest moment, maybe, is the way to say it. And they do these intensives and they have great
We
success.
perform last rites.
No.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. But, and they're wonderful therapists just for when you just need some light therapy, but they also have great knowledge and wisdom around relationships and learning about yourself in relationship is the most important thing, and that's what they're Miracle Workers Act. So, because if you're going to maintain a relationship, you have to have a great relationship with yourself. So,
Via Woody Allen.
yeah.
What's wrong with masturbation? At least I'm having sex with someone I love. You're even in relationship with yourself. So here they are now. This open forum, the way it works, they love to have your questions. So you can listen to what they want to tell you up front, and that they love the questions. And so get ready to stand in that fire and put yourself out there. Let's give them a hand.
Hi, everybody. I'm Linda Bloom. My main squeeze over here, Charlie Bloom. Yesterday, we celebrated the day we met, September 21st, 1968. We've been together 49 years.
Let's hear it.
And it was a,
Longer than some of you have even been alive.
yeah, most of them.
Longer than your
All of
parents
them.
have been alive. Wow.
So it was a really important day in my life when I found my beloved Charlie, and it didn't take me too long to know that I had a really good one here. I had been looking. I was young. I just turned 22, but I had really been looking because I knew partnership was for me. It's not for everybody, but most people would like to have a long-term, even lifetime partner. And so I knew that he had good raw materials because very soon, maybe it was even in the first 24 hours that I met him, his wallet opened up. And
there was no money in it.
it wasn't a high priority item for me. He had a picture of a beautiful little girl, 3 years old. And I said, "Who is this child in your wallet?" And he said, "That's my baby sister." Oh, do you know? I said, "Good father material. Check that box." And later on in that day, when we were having a conversation, he was telling me that recently he had caught a mouse in a trap in the apartment where he was living in a slummy district of Boston in Roxbury. And the mouse was still alive, but it was injured. And he nursed the mouse back to health. He fed the mouse and he took it to a field.
And I let him go in the street, and he immediately ran into the street and got hit by a truck.
It's
and
not
got squished.
true. He found a park with an open field and he saved the life of the mouse. And I said, tender-hearted guy. I got to check off that box. So I had been looking, and I was very naive and strongly influenced by the romantic myths that if you fall in love, you're going to join in this bliss and it's going to just unfold from there once you find the right person. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's up and it's down and it's up and it's down, and the highs and the lows don't get so low when you get some skill level, but we were very, very inexperienced, and neither one of us came from families where we had good models. But we had a good work ethic. So we both were hungry learners. We were college students at the time. And so, we took it on. We took it on to learn how to be eligible for a great relationship. I had a very lofty vision. I just didn't know what it was going to take. But like with anything that we commit ourselves to in life, we learn as we go, right? You learn as you go. First, you have to really want it and have the motivation to do it, and then you find people who can give you hints and teachings. So we would like to be that for you here today, to give you some hints for how you might be able to grow yourself into someone who's eligible for a great relationship. And I always tell Joe and Alana, and I tell Charlie, I get a big kick out of teaching this class. Just to guest teach once during the semester really lights me up, because I like to get with people when they're young and impressionable, and malleable before they've got hardening of the attitudes, before they've gotten so kind of crusty and sometimes cynical because they've been disappointed in love, where you still have that youthful vibrance and you're a sponge to take some things in that could really serve you well. And I saw that not many hands went up when Joe was asking, have people dug into 101 yet? And I hope that after you get a load of us today and get a sense of what we're about and our mission, that it will inspire you to read some of the things in that book. Even if you read the table of contents, you really grasp what's in the book. And then there may be some that really stand out for you, make you want to read the short stories. They average about 400 words, so you can really, just a few paragraphs. And we intentionally wrote that book to save people at the beginning of their relationship some trouble. The way the book came about was that Charlie's baby sister, remember the beautiful little girl in the picture I told you about the day I fell in love with him? Yeah, she got married, and she asked Charlie to speak at the wedding. So he was going through, Cale Gobran and Rilke and, the regular fare that people read at weddings, but it would only address one part of marriage. And so I said to him, why don't you write something? And you can have a broader throw. So that was the beginning of 101 Things. He wrote about 20 things that we wished we had some wise relative in our family to save us some trouble and bless us and gift us at our wedding. We didn't have anybody like that at the wedding. So Charlie got up at the ceremony for his sister, and he's got a nice delivery, had everybody on the edge of their chair, and some of the people were doing this. You hear this? It was usually the women poking the guys, saying, I've been trying to get this point across to you. He totally upstaged the minister. And so after the ceremony was over, people kept running up to him and saying, can I have a copy of that? You should publish that. And so that's how the book began. It came from the love that he had for his sister and wanting to wish her well and get her off to the best possible start. And so she got married in Los Angeles. All the way home, we lived in Sonoma at the time. From Los Angeles to Sonoma, most of that trip, we started brainstorming more one-liners, and we thought that that's how the book was going to be. Yeah, did you ever see the little Buddha's instruction book? It's tiny and it's only one line on a page. We thought we would publish it like that. So that was the beginning of it, that we would just distill down to essence some of the truths that we had found in our decades of being together. But then when we started showing them to people, they wanted to know more about that, and that's why we hooked the stories onto them. So by the time we had all the one-liners, we had 300. I think more than 300. There was a lot we didn't know when we first got together. And we didn't want the book to be a big, heavy tome, so we narrowed it down to the 101 most important things for you to know to have a great relationship. So I hope that you will take on the challenge of learning early. Even if you're not in a relationship now, this is some insurance for you to take out for when you do get in a relationship, that you can have a little bit easier time of it, a little bit more enjoyable time about it, that you can have some better negotiation and communication skills once you really get down to it. So
It's also applicable to peer relationships, parent relationships, sibling relationships.
absolutely true. Thank you very much, Alana. This is not just about romantic partnership, but if you can have mastery and skills there, you can do it anywhere. It tends to be the hottest fire. But what Alana's saying is absolutely true, that this will serve you well in your friendships. It'll help you relate better to mom and dad and your siblings. and to your fellow students and your roommates and your neighbors and, you know, on the job when you're gainfully employed after you get your degree, or while you're gainfully employed while you're earning your degree. Because relationships, you know, require time and attention and a higher level of skill. So I'm going to let Charlie talk to you for a little while.
Hi. You may notice that, during the course of this morning that Linda and I are similar in some ways, but in a lot of ways we're real different. In temperament, personalities, predispositions, even in most of our values are pretty consistent, but in terms of our styles of being in the world, we're very different. And in ways that are complementary. Complementary not in terms of complimenting people about positive things, but complementary in terms of making more whole. You know what I'm saying? Anybody here ever noticed that in your relationships there's this quality of complementarity sometimes, that you seem to attract people who are in some significant ways really different from you? Anybody notice that? Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, like the person who's really, you know, fastidious and has to have everything in place, and they can't go to bed if there's one dirty dish in the sink. And then the person who's like, hey, you know, chill out, man, it's okay. We can do the dishes tomorrow or, you know, next Thursday. It's okay. And you know, it always seemed strange to me. Why would that be? Why can't we draw people into our lives who are more like us? It would be so much easier, wouldn't it? I mean, geez, people who are more rational, people who are, you know, more like us. So we didn't have to get into all these different hassles about different things. So that's been the case with me and Linda. I mean, in a lot of really significant ways, we're real different. But in the ways in which I think matter the most, like in terms of fundamental, underlying, basic values, like the willingness to learn and grow, fundamental beliefs about human nature and about people, willingness to self-reflect, to look at ourselves instead of projecting blame and responsibility and power out there on everybody else. I mean, like basic things. On those, we're totally aligned. There's not a lot of them, though, but they're big. There's a lot of the different ones that, in terms of our personal preference and personality styles, that we have had to learn over the last approximately 50 years how to incorporate, live with. You know, it's strange that up until recently, in most states, and in some states it's still true, that a legitimate justification for divorce is irreconcilable differences. Have you heard that phrase before? Irreconcilable differences. What does it mean? Somebody, yeah, please.
Traits that aren't complementary, and then you can't really get past that because there's no way they could work together.
Yeah, they just can't be worked out. You can't reconcile these. You can't somehow make them both fit into a nice, neat package. They're differences that can't be changed, and that is has been held as a legitimate justification for divorce. Well, the reality is that even the very, very best relationships have irreconcilable differences. I mean, we wrote a book. Our second book is called The Secrets of Great Marriages. We interviewed a lot of couples for that book. And one of the things that they all had in common was that they had some irreconcilable differences. big ones, some of them. So there's been a trend for several decades in terms of the divorce rate going up. It's kind of plateaued now. It's a little bit under 50%. It's like 48 or 49% of marriages end in divorce now. Had gone up higher than that. It's come down a little bit. But a lot of that is due to the expectation that people have that we really need to reconcile these differences, because if we don't, we're screwed. You know, I mean, I can't live with somebody who needs to wash the dishes after every meal, for example.
Puts ketchup on their pizza.
Or well, I mean, that's legitimate. I mean, if you live with somebody that puts ketchup on the pizza, then that is. But some things are not, you know. No, but you know, the point is this: that if we don't learn how to come to terms with the inevitable differences that we're going to share with people with whom we're in relationship, then our chances of sustaining, I mean, we can create one, but of sustaining over the long haul a fulfilling, mutually satisfying relationship are pretty close to nil. So let me ask you this. Why do you think it is that we are kind of wired to attract people who are in significant ways very different than us? Yeah, what do you think?
Because we're egotistical and we don't, like, you know, when we're kids and we're like, oh, you can't, you know, like, you can't like the same thing as me. Like, you know.
Yes, there is kind of a natural predisposition for all of us to want to be affiliated with people who are on the same page as we are. I mean, like, it feels good. It feels like I'm not alone. It feels like we're in sync with each other. And most importantly, it confirms my belief that I'm right about things. And if you've got a different style, different way of being, then you're wrong. And you need to get on my side of things. You need to see things my way. You need to be the kind of person that I know is doing things correctly. So we are kind of geared towards that. And yet, somehow, we still do draw people in who are complementary to us, different. So why do you think that is? What do you think? Yeah.
Because we want to show that we're not all that self-centered, that we can show that we can be compatible with somebody else that differs from us. So it's like, see, I'm accepting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so again, that's sort of like an ego thing. I want to do this to create, yeah, did everybody hear?
Repeat the question, or
Yeah.
repeat the comment.
Yeah, that we want to show people that we're accepting. So I want people to see me in a certain way, so I don't want them to think that I'm just too narrow-minded.
And there's a hand here. Yes, please.
I would just say it provides a sense of balance, and it kind of pushes you outside your comfort zones at times, and it provides opportunities for growth, like whether or not we're conscious of that.
Provides opportunities for growth, provides a sense of balance, kind of makes us more inclusive, includes more aspects into our life, rather than just drawing in somebody who's going to reinforce where I am. So if, let's say, the potential that we have to be whole is like this much, and we're living in a frame that's this narrow, and we are all doing that, by the way. In case you think you're an exception, think again. Because we are all living in a narrow frame of interpretive reality. That we see things a certain way on the basis of our own predispositions and the basis of beliefs that we took in from our family, from society, from our churches. And so this is the world to most of us. The world is this big, but this is the world that we operate in. When we connect to somebody who's living in a different world. Like they're living in this world, and we incorporate each other's world in our lives. Instead of living in this, I'm living in this now. What does that mean in terms of the quality of my own life? Huh? It's going to improve. My options are going to expand. My tolerance for differences is going to be changed. I'm going to become more understanding, more expansive, more inclusive.
We're very bitter.
Huh?
Or very bitter?
Yeah. Well,
That's an option too.
That's an option too. But mostly the way it's going to impact on my life is it's going to open up new possibilities for me to be in the world. It's going to bring out what's inside of me that hasn't been tapped because it's outside of this band. It's out here, but I haven't been able to incorporate it because I'm in resistance to some of those parts of me.
So
Oh,
I
you wanna go?
want to just pick up on this, or very bitter, because I think that there is a part of us who is in strong resistance to the other part of us that wants to grow and brings these people into our life because of that drive for mastery. So the part of us that's the cynic, the part of us that's skeptical, the part of us that's doubtful, that doesn't want to believe that this person is in our life to serve us to grow, may just go to, oh, this is too hard. You know, I just am a click away from all these other options. There's going to be somebody who's easier to be with than this one. And I just think that that's such a lost opportunity. When things get rough, that's when it just really gets interesting. What is it about myself that is being reflected back to me right now that I may not want to see? So if we have enough drive for mastery, we'll be really investigating that question of why am I having this dynamic with this person? Should I really get away from them? Sometimes that's the most sensible, logical, rational, reasonable thing to do. We don't want to stay in a relationship that's full of pain. But if there are some good things in the relationship, to at least investigate that. To investigate the part that's being agitated, that's being irritated, that's being challenged. And not just stay and stand it and suck it up and get bitter, but to inquire, and maybe there's something being shown to me here that I need to see about myself. Thank you for letting me just add that piece.
Okay. So here we are. We are in this world and in this body that has what we call competing commitments. On the one hand, there's a commitment that I have.
Joe is telling us we need to stand differently from the camera.
You know what
Don't be in front of the mic. Yeah, thank you.
As I was saying, we've got these competing commitments. On the one hand, there's this part of me that wants to be myself and wants other people to be more like me because that feels good. That feels like I'm connected to other people. I feel safer when I'm in connection with other people, particularly if we share similar beliefs and values. On the other hand, I've got this attachment to being the way I am, and I'm really kind of resisting moving outside of this narrow band, which another term for this is comfort zone. Now, it's not, I don't think that's quite an appropriate word, but that's the word most people use. The reason is because it's not always comfortable in there, but it does feel safer. It's kind of a zone of non-discomfort. Yeah. I'm not really comfortable, but I'm not really uncomfortable either, so it's, that's sort of where it is. And one of the reasons that we are uncomfortable is because there's a part of us that knows that there's more to me than who I'm putting out here in the world. I know that. Have you ever had that feeling like I know there's more to me than this person that I'm trying to be, that I think I have to be. Anybody ever felt that way? I know that there's more.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it that prevents us from being more willing to move more fully into a world that in some ways is incongruent with who we think we are?
Resistance to change, afraid of change.
Resistance to change, fear of change. Change, I mean, some people think, yeah, change. People get elected by saying they're going to change things, right? Well, you know, there's two possibilities when change comes about. What are they?
It's good, it's gonna be bad.
Going to be better, or it's going to be worse? It's going to be good, it's going to be bad. And it's the part about change that could be worse. Things could be worse. Looks pretty good, but the downside is, may not be so great. There may be a downside here. So we're kind of in the middle of this, what we call ambivalence. I want it and I don't. It's like approach and avoid. Engage, withdraw. Anybody here ever been in relationships where you get mixed messages from your partner? Most relationships have mixed messages. Because sometimes they're speaking from the part of them that wants to connect, wants to merge, and sometimes they're speaking from the part of them that wants to protect. Because it can feel like I'm at risk. Something's at risk if I let myself merge with you. What is it that I might lose if I do that? What might I lose if I really let those boundaries down, loosen my grip on the way I have to be, the way people have to be, allow myself to enter into a connection in which that happens? What's the potential downside of that? What is it that I might have to fear happening? There could be pain. There could be pain because I don't know what it's going to feel like. Yeah.
Fear of losing yourself.
I could lose my connection with who I feel myself to be. Because I'm keeping all that going by speaking and behaving and interacting in accordance with this structure. And if that's who I feel I am, then that is potentially a big risk, to risk losing myself. Did you want to say something?
So, we sometimes, when we're writing our blogs and our books and teaching, even when we're seeing an individual or a couple, we say, this growing a great relationship is not for the faint of heart. You have to have courage, because all these things that Charlie is referring to, being drawn to people who are different than we are, and then there's this tendency to try to want to fix them just a little bit, just a tad here or there for their own good, you know, because we love them so much. I'm being a little sarcastic here. But the impulse is there. The impulse to want to change the other person, to think in black and white thinking, to think in right and wrong thinking, to think, you know, they're so great and I'm not so great, or I'm so great and they're not so great, and there's something wrong here and I don't think it's me. I don't want to think it's me. So to enter into a relationship with a commitment to learn and grow and discover more about ourselves, more about how relationships work. Because there are going to be times when the love is going to be tough sometimes, where it's going to challenge our belief system, where we're going to be called upon to let go of some of our old habituated thinking and our habituated ways of behaving. That's one of the things that relationships are great for, to confront us, to look at ourselves, to use the relationship as a mirror to discover more about ourselves
and how we operate in the world, and as a catalyst to grow. So what we notice as we observe, most people really want to go for the comfort and security. And that remark that Charlie made about the so-called comfort zone, you know, it's a narrow zone. It can feel cramped, it can feel boring, it can feel predictable, it can feel dull. And what we invite people to do, because it's been so vitalizing for us, is to have a larger area to play in, you know, to be able to be more accepting, to be more tolerant, to be more curious. And it really has served us, and it's one of the things that we offer when we teach, is make a commitment to not just live in the security and comfort. Make a commitment, you know, a fierce commitment in your life to growing, to continue to learn. After you get your hard-earned degree from, you know, being in all these classes and writing all these papers and taking all these midterms and finals, that you know your areas of interest. I hope relationship will be one of your areas of interest. You'll keep reading the best books. Maybe you'll go to workshops. Maybe you'll come to our workshop. Do you know? And that you continue on that growth curve. And particularly the people that you're in relationship with, your closest people, not just if you have a romantic partner, but the people who you're closest to are going to bring stuff up. And to be curious, you know, to investigate that. What is it that I'm to be learning here? And that's really going to take you a ways. So when Charlie put the question out to everybody, why do we keep drawing these people into our life that are so different than we are? There is this very deep wisdom in each one of us that is our drive towards wholeness. And we will be attracted to people who are very different than we are, so that we can learn more about their strengths and learn from them so that we can be our whole self instead of just a sliver of who we can be. And it's an exciting game. Do you know? When the research about the older couples, some of them 40, 50, even 60 years together, and they're still romantic and they're still into each other and their relationships are alive. When the interviewers ask them, what are your secrets of success? It's a common theme that they're always reaching for novel experiences. Do you know? They're not just in the comfort and security with the tried and true. They're learning, they're growing, they're experiencing together, and they share that. And so one of the intentions that I have today is to inspire you to a real strong commitment to your own personal growth and your own learning, and particularly to use your relationships as a catalyst to goose you along that path. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of how things are. We are all a collection of paradoxes, of impulses and desires that contradict each other. We want to be ourselves and authentic and real, and we want to be responsible for ourselves, and at the same time, we are social beings who require not just superficial connection to other people where we have a lot of chit-chat, but deep, meaningful connection where we feel understood, where we feel a sense of connection, where our sense of meaning and purpose is fulfilled. And these two forces are constantly at play in our lives. And it can be kind of crazy making. It can seem like, you know, am I schizophrenic? I want this, but I want this at the same time. Well, no, you're not schizophrenic probably, but you might be. You know, I may be schizophrenic, but I do have each other. That's supposed to be the joke. I don't mean me personally. Anyway, no, it's really coming to terms with the reality that we have to deal with this within ourselves. The consequence to not coming to terms with our mutually contradictory internal impulses is that the conflict between them inevitably gets expressed and projected outwardly. Now this is really the essence of what we're talking about here today. So you can get this, that we've got this conflict inside of ourselves, and if we don't come to terms with it, meaning if we don't accept that this is the reality and I'm going to be dealing with this for the rest of my life, and I need to learn how to come to terms with it in a way that it doesn't drive me and other people crazy. And it is possible to do that. It is possible to come to terms with the contradiction rather than to get rid of it. If I don't come to terms with it, it's going to get projected out there. This inner conflict is going to show up in my relationships with other people. And I'm going to choose people who represent one side or the other, and instead of dealing with it within myself, I'm going to get into arguments with them. Does this make sense to you? Do you understand what I'm saying here? Mm-hmm. This is the key. This is the essence of what it is that's underneath the difficulties that most people have in relationships, is that they have not done the inner work of reconciling their inner conflicts, and it gets projected out there. So they act it out, they speak it out, it shows up in their relationships. How many of you can actually see examples of how that may have been going on in aspects of your life? How many of you can see that?
Yeah.
So if you need some motivation to take this work, and it is work of being able to create a conscious relationship, think about that for a minute. Think about how much you stand to gain by doing this work. If you were really at peace with those parts of yourself, you wouldn't be getting into the kind of circular, unending arguments that most people get into. The arguments that eventually leave people at a place where they've got two options. One is to continue to live in a miserable, painful relationship, or to get out. That's how a lot of people see it. There is a third possibility, and that is to do the work that you need to do to deal with and come to terms with these conflicting impulses within you, and see what happens.
So
Yeah, please.
Yes,
Can we
give a
just-
couple of examples of what the conflicting impulses would be. You know, like, I'm a really nice girl, but I'm a bitch too.
Yeah. Okay.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Great example.
Yeah. So the part of me that may not be terribly attractive to other people, the inner bitch, or the inner controller, or the inner judge, or the inner weakling, the part of me that I might be working really hard to suppress so that people don't see that and don't reject me, is what I have to recognize is there. That I am not just the social persona that I project on to the rest of the world. I'm that is true. I might be amplifying it or exaggerating it in some way. But also, the opposite's also true. That the opposite of who you want people to see you as being is also in there. We have enormous resistance, not only to putting it out there and letting people know, hey, I can be, kind of selfish sometimes. Or I can be really judgmental sometimes.
Sacrificing martyr. Victim.
So we've got both things inside of us, and we've got a lot of resistance we spend a lot of energy, somebody used the word ego earlier. Ego is our mental construct for who we want to be perceived as being. And we work really hard to perfect that and remind people that this is who I am. It takes a lot of energy. It can be exhausting when you have that obligation to keep doing that. But there's a fear that keeps us doing that and keeps us continuing to suppress the other side. What's the fear of exposing what we call the shadow? What is the fear of what might happen?
We won't be accepted
Yeah.
by our peers.
Yeah.
whatever.
And the reason that we're so convinced that we're not going to be accepted is really simple. Because we're not accepting that in ourselves. And when you don't accept something, you can't help but assume, absolutely certain, that nobody else can. I mean, if there's a part of me that I find totally unacceptable, like let's say I grew up in a family where boys had to be strong and tough and they couldn't be scared, and I couldn't even show that I was afraid, because then I could get punished for that. You know, grow up, be a man, stop being a sissy, stop acting like a girl, get over it. So if I internalize that belief, I'm going to have that same fear. I'm going to suppress fear in me, and then I'm going to be afraid of having that fear exposed, because other people are going to find it just as unacceptable as I do. Now here's the funny thing, that when I begin to become more able to accept, yeah, sometimes I am scared about some stuff. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I've got good reason to be, sometimes it doesn't seem like I've got good reason to be, but I'm still scared. But you know, yeah, the truth is that that's in there too. When I come to terms with that within me, a funny thing happens, is that I no longer have the same fear of being rejected by other people. It's not as big a deal to me, because the reason that I want so badly for them to accept me is because I don't have my own acceptance. Once I have my own acceptance, it's not as big a deal if they don't like me. I mean, yeah, it'd be nice if everybody liked me, but I know the reality is that some people are going to like me and some people won't, no matter how hard I try. You know?
Is this what they refer to sometimes as the ego and superego?
Well, the superego is the part that's keeping us in line.
Right.
It's the part that keeps us in the box, so that we don't transgress the social rules and we don't expose ourselves to rejection and risk. You know, it's kind of the part that keeps us tempered down there.
So as I'm looking around the room, I'm seeing that most of you in this room, maybe 100% of you, are in your 20s. And the reason that they call it the trying 20s is because you're supposed to try a lot of different things. You try a lot of different majors and you see what, you know, really floats your boat in terms of what you want to be doing with your life, where your main areas of interest and your skill set is, and to try a lot of different kinds of relationships. You know, that's age appropriate. You want to date a lot of people and see what they're like and see where they're going and see where you're going and see if you're going in the same general direction. But while you're doing this experimentation that's so exciting and it's daunting, I know the dating scene and this experimentation is, you know, it's fits and starts. It's glorious and wonderful, and also it's disappointing when it doesn't work out, when you're into them and they're not into you, and there's going to be a lot of that. But this experimentation that Charlie is talking about finding out more about who we are, particularly the parts that are in the shadow, it's an extraordinary opportunity. So if you're in a relationship with somebody and you're seeing them as a lab partner, you know, your lab partner about self-discovery, then as things come up, great things come up and gnarly things come up, you have a chance to learn about yourself. And what I would like to tell you is the same thing that I told my kids. Don't rush into committed partnership or marriage too fast. Give yourself a chance to really get to know yourself well, to know what your values are, to know what your vision for your life is. Because in your 20s, you are refining that and refining that and refining that. And the shadow work is a very important part of knowing who you are in your fullness, in your glory. And also, as you get to know yourself better, you get to see people in your life more clearly. And you see their assets and their great gifts and, you know, their glorious part. You get to see their shadow part. We've all got a shadow. And the chances of making a choice that could work on the long term, hopefully a lifetime, do you know, are much greater when you know yourself well and you're awake and aware enough to know other. And I just will announce right away, I know that marriage is going out of vogue these days. This is the first time in history that there are ever more single women in the United States than married women. The birth rate to women who are not married is growing and growing. And I want to just declare I'm an old-fashioned girl. I believe in marriage. I believe that marriage has been the best thing that ever happened to me, and it hasn't always been a walk in the park. When Charlie said we're very different, we're very different. The differences that we came into this relationship with are still here. We just made a big space. You know, we made a big space to allow for the differences. But I'm a believer in marriage, and I want to offer to you to consider that the people who just cohabitate and just live together, which I also think is a good idea to get to know whether you're compatible on a short-term basis, not several years or, you know, decades. The statistics are very clear that without the commitment of marriage, the chances of the relationship thriving and surviving are not as great as in when couples seal the container in marriage. And I don't think that all has to do with how people view you. I think that has to do with you amp up your own internal commitment to work out whatever needs to be worked out to be able to make it last over the long term. So I believe in that sealed container, but I'm also a believer in really know who you are and who you're throwing in with before you seal it, so you give yourself the best possible chance. So just before the break, I asked you to be thinking of some questions on the break, and I want you to just let them bubble up, because we're interested in knowing what your concerns are about relationship. We could talk for days. We've taught 7-day workshops. We can fill up the time. But I really would like to target my remarks just to your concerns. So if you could just let it come up into consciousness, the parts about relationship that are confusing for you, if you've had difficulty and challenge in the past or presently, to risk sticking it out there in front of the group and us, because we could probably save you a little bit of trouble and we could address your concerns.
I just want to clarify, it need not be something that is particular or personal to you. It could just be questions about relationships that are kind of generic, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get as personal or as impersonal as you want. Yeah.
What are some signs that the relationship is just over and there's no solving it? You can't go back.
Great question. So I'll speak to it first. If the person that you're in relationship with says, I'm done, do you know? They may or may not be done. It may be that they're really facing something very difficult and hard for them to face, jumping to the next level of commitment, jumping to a higher level of responsibility. And if you can, what we called hold the tension of the opposites, maybe they're done, but maybe they're just hitting a hard spot, do you know? And we can not make them bad and wrong for being in the place where they are, because it really hurts to be rejected. I mean, that's some of the worst pain. If we can just, I know who I am. I know who I am. I'm learning more about who I am. and I know that I love and care about this person and give them a little space, sometimes they can get past that impasse. But if they're closed and I don't want to look and I don't want to talk about it, it's a pretty clear sign that there isn't any wiggle room in there. I always think that, you know, if a relationship where there's been a lot that's been invested, you lose it at that point, I always feel like it's such a waste of potential. Because you might just be at the place where a breakthrough could be possible rather than a breakup. But both people have to, you know, open to that possibility and look more deeply what's really going on here. And not every relationship deserves to be saved or should be saved. But I always recommend, if you get to the point where you know it's time to let go, do it with loving kindness and don't take parting shots. Because that's the way most people leave a relationship. They don't leave with loving kindness. You know, they do drive-by shooting. And I don't think it's good to break up over the internet with an email or a text. You look them in the eye and to the best of your ability acknowledge what was good about the relationship, what you learned, and then let go with some dignity.
I want to ask, going back to our first session, you know, you talked about the ego, and you talked about the other. Elaborate a little bit on the other, and how do we get in touch with it? How do we know what questions to ask ourselves about finding out what the other is?
Yeah, great question. You want to take that on?
No,
Okay, then I will.
but I will anyway. Yeah, the other. This is a perfect lead into one of the things that I wanted us to cover this second half. One of the, and I can also speak to your question a little bit too. One of the things that we need to be able to know is what is our work? What is it that, what's our growing edge? Where are the places that I'm in resistance to really seeing who I am? Because as I begin to see that more clearly and become more accepting of that, the other that Joe is referring to, which is my perception of anybody who is operating outside of this box here, my experience of that is going to shift. And I'm going to, as I become more understanding and accepting of who I am, more clear about who I am, then my relationship with those people who are outside of the box is going to shift. And I'm going to have a more understanding, accepting, and compassionate relationship with them. Which doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have a wonderful relationship, because it could be that even I can still, it's possible to love somebody and still feel like we're not a good fit. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that? Mm-hmm. I mean, some people think that, you know, when you really love somebody, then that's enough.
It's a good start.
Yeah, but there are other things that have got to be in place too. And one of them is something called chemistry. What is your understanding of what chemistry is? When you're talking about having good chemistry or not having it, what does that mean to you? What does that term mean?
Michael, how about pheromones?
It just kind of feels natural, I guess. I think that's chemistry.
Uh-huh.
Like when it just kind of rolls into the first 5 minutes of meeting that person, you feel like there's a click. Yeah. And you actually feel happy being around them.
Yep, yep. So your own inner experience shifts when you feel that you've got that connection and there's that chemistry. What else?
When both of you know who you are.
When both of you know who you both are. When I am clear about who I am, you're clear about who you are, and we can meet in that place of mutual recognition. Yeah. Good.
There was another hand.
I was just gonna say, this kind of goes off of this, but like your underlying like bond and connection that you just have with each other and like mutual understanding.
Yeah. It's some.
Yeah, I just want to point out that all these three people who spoke to chemistry spoke it in a more global way than sexual attraction. Because you know you can be strongly attracted to somebody and they can be strongly attracted to you, and you don't have any values in common or the other things that are so important.
Yeah. Anybody else want to throw in your 2 cents about this? So that kind of ineffable, unnameable element that's hard to really describe, that feeling of we're a good fit, we're connected, this feels right. I really like this person. I like the feeling that I have when I'm connected with them. It feels good, it feels right. Now, the thing about chemistry is, you may have noticed, it doesn't necessarily last forever. It's not necessarily permanent. But if it's not there, even if you love the person, it's going to be very hard to put your whole heart and soul into that relationship. Because some part of you is going to know that, you know, they're a great person. I've got everything on the checklist is there, you know, education, religion, they've got the right thing, they've got, you know, whatever it is. But only I can know whether that feeling of brightness, connection, mutual sharing of our lives, whether that's really there for me. So that requires self-knowledge, self-awareness, self-reflection, and self-trust. That's the work, is to cultivate all of those things so that I can really trust my judgment when it says yes about this person, or when it says no about this person. To really trust myself to be able to answer questions like the one that this gentleman asked earlier, about how do I know when it's over. If I know what my work is, if I trust that I've done the best that I can do, if I've really gone as far as I can go without compromising my own integrity, because it's possible to work too hard, to bend over too far backwards. You know what I'm saying? It's possible to do that. If I know where my limits are, I'm going to be more able to identify when it's truly over, when I've given it my very best shot, and whether or not it's time to check out of it.
So I want to mention that they're usually, because of this opposites attract business, there's one that's stronger in generosity of spirit and being in service to the other person and making the kind of adjustments and accommodations that the relationship requires to thrive. And then there's another person in that pair who's better at self-care. They're not as accommodating, you know, they're much more about self. And those kind of people tend to get together. And if you're too accommodating and you're too generous of spirit and you're too, you know, looking for what they want all the time, you're definitely screwed. And if you're more on the selfish end of the spectrum and you're all about self and you've got to accommodate to me, you're screwed. And in this book, Secrets of Great Relationships, one of the things that we found, Secret of Great Marriages, these people were champs on both sides of the spectrum. So that was a really important finding, that they could be generous of spirit, but they knew where their limits were and they didn't violate those. And they could be strong in self-care, knowing what they needed, negotiating in good faith with their partner to get their needs met, but not go over that line to be domineering. So that's a really important balance point to negotiate in a relationship. It has to be reciprocal. It has to work for both of you. It has to be a win-win. Because as soon as you play the win-lose game, and even on small items, and somebody else feels bad and wrong and disadvantaged, you've lost too.
because there's going to be less trust, less communication, less rapport, less sex, less emotional intimacy. So even if you win, you lose. And I wanted to pick up the thread. People toss around the word ego, and people have all kind of different associations to what that really means. And so when I ever use it, and I don't use the word too much because there's so much confusion about what it is. But when I use that word, I talk about the looking good self. You know, the presentation to the world. This is dress for success. You know, you want to look good, you want to feel good, and you want to be right. And that's part of who we are, and it's important to cultivate ego strength and to have a good presentation in the world. But the other, I refer to as the authentic self. That's the part that's behind the persona, you know, behind the mask. The more authentic self is the part that's willing to know their shadow, and for their intimates only. The hand-picked special few, you can know the real me. You know, I don't keep my image up with my lover and with my closest friends. They can know my shadow. They can know my feelings of inadequacy and insecurities. They can know my tender spots, my sore spots. You know, my flaws. And we have a select group that we will show our authentic self. Okay. More questions. And thank you. Thank you for the people who've asked questions so far. What's percolating in there? Please, right
What would
here.
you
And I
say-
saw you, so you're next.
Okay, so what would you say on like being in a relationship where someone kind of takes advantage, takes advantage of the relationship, like takes you for granted. And then once like the relationship's over and done, then they like start to try.
Do you want me to
Like
go
that.
first? Yeah. I will speak to it. There are people who are a little bit more on the self-centered side, and they tend to be more exploitive. You know, what's in it for me? You know, and I want to go here, and I want to eat in this restaurant, and I want to see this movie, and I like it like this. And they usually can sort of unconsciously sniff out the accommodators who will indulge them in that. And while the ones that are on that side of the spectrum are indulging them, we're helping to create the monster. You know? We get in our own way. That's our challenge. As long as we're in relationship with somebody like that, we get really clear about our boundaries. This will work for me, and this will not work for me. And if you want to see that blood and guts movie and you don't want to go to the chick flick, we can go to separate movies, and I'll meet you afterward. Do you know? That's individuation. And I'm not going to be coerced to go into that movie that I'm going to put that horrible stuff in my consciousness. Or I really don't like Chinese food. And can't we just keep negotiating in good faith until we find some place where we can both go? So I'm just using those as examples, because if we find ourselves in relationship with somebody who really is more insistent, you know, and demanding in having things their way, we have responsibility for negotiating for our needs in a way that they will treat us with more respect. And if they can't have an egalitarian relationship, which is the only kind that's going to really last, that people can both feel seen and heard and recognized and respected and honored, that's the only kind of relationship that can last into the great zone on the long term, then they're not right for us. And sometimes it has to get to the point where you say, I'm not going to do this relationship anymore unless you can meet me, and there's going to be reciprocity and mutual respect here. And then they say, I don't want to lose this relationship. I better check myself out and modify some of my behaviors so that you can really feel the caring that I have for you. Or not. And then they go on and see if they can exploit somebody else. Yeah, but we mustn't succumb to feeling victimized by the selfish takers. We need to rise up to a level of responsibility where we negotiate for our needs. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I mean, you covered quite a bit. Are you clear about?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah, good.
And right behind her.
Yeah. What's your guys' position on people getting back together? Like they either break up or they take a break and then get back together. Is that what do you guys think about that?
You take this one.
I don't really have a position on it. Could you rephrase the question?
Like, is it healthy, or even is it possible for people to like break up and then get back together and then they're better off that second time around?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Repeat it.
Okay.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. Did everybody hear what he just said?
No.
Okay. we have some people out there who. Hey, everybody. Goodbye. Yeah. So the question is, what are our thoughts on the possibility of people who are together breaking up and then coming back together again in terms of the likelihood of them having a successful relationship? Interestingly, we have a couple in our second book, the Secrets book, who did just that. They not only broke up, but they got a divorce. And they were very divorced for 4 years. They led totally separate lives. Now, what happened with each one of them during those 4 years is, I think, what enabled them to come back together again and create a much better relationship. They got remarried. One of their sons officiated at the ceremony. And that was about 12 years ago, and they're doing great. So the key element is what people are doing between the time that they break up and the time they get back together again. With this particular couple, what they each one of them decided to do unilaterally, I mean, they didn't collaborate on this. When they got divorced, it's like, we're done. You know, I'm really not interested in, knowing anything about your life. You know, we can get together only to discuss matters about raising the boys. And so they were very disconnected. But what they both committed to doing on their own was the work that we're talking about here, about developing self-trust. Because they both realized that they didn't even know who they were. They got married when they were young. They didn't really have a clear sense of who they were. And how can you really have a deep connection with somebody when you don't really have one with yourself? So they got into, they did things like, he got into a men's group, she got into a women's group, they got into therapy, they started reading stuff, they went to workshops, they got committed to the process of self-reflection, self-understanding, self-acceptance, self-trust. They got committed to that process. And as fate would have it, one of their boys got into a pretty serious car accident that caused him to be hospitalized for several weeks. And he recovered fully, but it was a pretty serious accident. And they started running into each other at the hospital when they were visiting. And they both kind of recognized that, you've changed. And they started spending a little time together, very gradually. And to make a long story short, they got really clear that they still cared for each other, and they saw the possibility of, gee, maybe we could make it. And that's a happy ending. Now, the statistics don't necessarily bear that out, because most remarriages, that is, people who marry the same person the second time, are not successful. The majority are not. But I think that the reason for that is because of what the people did or didn't do in that space between the divorce and the remarriage. If you do your work, it's not a guarantee that it's going to happen, but it makes it much more likely.
And let me just add, and then I'm gonna speak to you, Joe, that the moral of the story is that people, they really had a serious pause to reflect and grew during that. But it doesn't have to necessarily be long like that. You know, sometimes you can break up for days or weeks and have a real deep conversation with yourself about what worked and didn't work in the relationship, particularly the piece that broke you up. And if you can get a handle on, if I were to shift this and they were to shift that, we could really use that which is good in our relationship and go forward in a whole new way. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a long separation, but it needs to be some real deep inner looking to see what was missing that led to the breakup. And then I don't think you're going right back into the same old anymore. You're going with fresh eyes. You know, you're going with a new commitment that you can invite them to take a look at what got you way off the road and how you could put the correction back in. So no, I don't think it would necessarily be dangerous or unhealthy or unwholesome to reunite as long as both people are doing their work, like Maya and Barry did in the story. Thanks for that question. And Joe, what's on your mind?
How can I learn how to speak my truth in relationship? I think that story you told goes to that. How can I learn that?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Joe. I'm going to address it first. I think that some people, probably most people, I'd go so far as to say most people, aren't adept at good communication skill about speaking their truth of their experience without blame and judgment. So they tend to withhold when they're feeling uncomfortable because they don't want to cause harm or invite retaliation. Because if we speak with blame and judgment, you know that we're often going to get a lot of pushback, blowback. And then after things calm down, we feel guilty because we said things we're very unskillful. So to learn that very essential communication skill of not speaking out of our opinions and our thoughts, you know, which are often critical and judgmental, but speaking out of our deeper experience, where we talk about our feelings and our needs. And it's vulnerable to speak from that depth, but it makes all the difference. And these great couples that we wrote about, these exemplary, happy couples, average amount of years together, 31 years. These were not the starry-eyed, you know, newlyweds who were still blissed out in infatuation stage. These are the veterans, you know, they've really been in relationship for long enough to know what worked. They were quite accomplished at being able to negotiate for their needs and to speak, you know, to speak in ways that invited collaboration and participation from their partners. Do you want to speak to it?
So the question is, how can we learn how to what?
Well, it occurs to me that first you have to be brave enough to stand in that fire, to speak your truth, number
so
one.
you're answering,
But number two, how do I deliver it? Linda just spoke to don't do it up here, do it from your inner feeling, which to me, as I interpret that, it means, look, this isn't your problem. You're just being you. It's my problem.
Yeah. So that's really very true. To take responsibility for it and to clarify to the person through your words and through your whole being that I'm speaking from my experience. This is not even about you, but what you did triggered something in me, and I want to share that with you if you're open to hearing about it. And so we are, for the most part, programmed to speak to people about what their problem is or about what we want them to do or say differently, or the focus is on, you know, you made me feel this way, you need to do this. And it's a conditioned pattern that most of us have. And it's a defensive pattern. It's a pattern that defends, protects us, helps us to avoid being vulnerable and saying, it really hurt my feelings when you said that. Or saying, I really got pissed off when you said that. It prevents us from exposing a part of ourselves that somebody else could get in reaction to, and then we know where that could go. So let's avoid that. So it is, like you said, it's about courage. It's about having not only the courage to take the risk of exposing a part of myself that could be judged by somebody, but it's about trust, it's about self-trust also. It's trusting myself, not to know that I'm going to be able to speak in a way that's going to make sure that this person doesn't get triggered or reactive, because it's going to happen. I got to know that it's not possible for me to be so perfect in my communications that nobody is ever going to get reactive to me. I guarantee one thing that you can count on in your life is that there will be times, no matter how eloquent and articulate, courageous you are, that people are going to react. So it's a given. So rather than trying to prevent that from happening, I want to be really careful I say this the right way. Be conscious about, I want to minimize that happening, but I trust myself to know, and I know myself enough to trust that if I do get some blowback from somebody, I can handle it.
And we're both of us fond about do-overs. Do you know that you have an agreement with the people that you're close to that if you get into edgy conversation and you realize that maybe you were blamey, accusatory, critical, judgmental, that you could do take two, and you could do over, let me rephrase that, and it's courteous to yourself and to the person that you're in a relationship with, that you can put the corrections in. And also like to distill some of the teachings down to small sound bites, because sometimes people find that they can remember, a word or two that reminds them. And I'm fond of blame fast. Do you know?
That means be really quick to blame somebody.
Not
no?
fast like hurry.
Oh, okay.
Fast like when you fast and don't eat.
Oh.
Do you know that kind of fast? So, no blame.
And a follow-up, so if speaking your truth doesn't resolve this. In other words, whatever it was the problem, the other person is not willing to correct it. What's my option then? Where does the relationship go from there?
Well, of course it varies, but speaking your truth isn't necessarily coming from an intention to get the other person to change or to do anything differently. If it does come from that intention, it's going to be experienced by the other person as a form of manipulation. And they're going to pick it up, they're going to smell it, and you're going to get more resistance. So you better check your intention first before you even open up your mouth. Because if my intention is to convince you that you're wrong and to get you on my side of the fence and agree with me, I'm screwed, because you're going to smell that. We're not stupid. Can't you kind of tell when people are trying to manipulate you into doing something or thinking a certain way?
Yeah.
So check your intention, first of all. And if that's part of your intention, either change your intention or shut up.
And it's important, as you do this lab work, to know which side of the spectrum you're on. Because some people are on the blurter side of the spectrum, and they just speak things and they cause harm, and they need to learn how to shut the hell up,
Let me just say something.
Yeah.
So given the fact that for most of us the intention is, when we speak, we are speaking to try to get this other person to be a certain way. There is that element of a desire for them to be different in some way. That's often the intention. So if we're not operating from that intention, and we want to speak our truth. Why would you want to speak your truth if it wasn't to get some kind of a reaction from them? What is an intention that might be driving the motivation to make that choice? Because if you're not clear about that, your default is going to be to try to coerce them in some way. So what possible intention might you have to do that? Yeah, please.
To help them understand you and where you're coming from.
Okay, so one could be, I want to speak what's really true for me, because I don't trust that you really understand what I'm saying, because if you really understood it, you might not feel the way you do. So the intention could be to create better mutual understanding. That's great. What's another possible intention? For me to want to speak my truth. Yeah.
I would say kind of going off what we talked about before, setting your boundaries, and not getting trapped in the constantly giving in and bending over backwards.
Right.
What I'm doing in speaking my truth is I'm going on the record as making it clear who I am, what I'm experiencing, and what I need in order for you to have more information about me, so that we can increase our chances of being able to create some mutual understanding here. Excellent, absolutely.
The chances of having that productive interchange are so much greater when you really know what side of the spectrum you're on. So if you have a tendency to be more aggressive, more outspoken, more on the controlling end, you may need to back off a little bit more, to know when to silence yourself, to practice self-discipline, to be quiet. Those of us who are on the stuffer end, who are more about peacemakers, accommodators, in service, maybe even angerphobic, we need to know that about ourselves, because our work to do is to find our voice and to find our courage and our assertiveness, even some aggression, to be able to speak up and go on the record and negotiate for our needs and be willing to risk, sticking ourselves out there. This is my vision of what I would like the relationship to be, and invite them into it, not to hold on to it with a white knuckle grip. But sometimes those of us who have been too much on the accommodating, withholding end have to pendulum swing over to kind of bitchy, aggressive, controlling, to come back towards middle. And sometimes the people who have been on the other end of the spectrum will do that too. It's all experimentation, do you understand? That when you're experimenting with a different way of being, you may have to do it writ large to be able to settle towards the mid-zone.
Any other possible motivations that might cause somebody to speak authentically? Please.
How do you deal with what if you don't know how to shut the hell up? How to fix whatever you said when you were mad, and how to not, I guess, hurt the person, or how to fix it afterwards, I guess.
Great question. She's asking about once you let something out and you, oh God, I probably shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have said it with that tone, or I shouldn't have said it, in the way that blasted them. So what she's asking about, after the damage is already done, how do you repair? And this is one of the art forms that people with great relationships have mastered. Do you know? Because we can't never make mistakes, we can't be perfect, we can't love people unconditionally all the time. We're going to say things we're sorry for, we're going to blurt out things, we'll do some drive-by, But as soon as we're conscious enough to know that we've done harm, we want to try to clean it up as best we can. And to have an agreement with your partner that you don't have to be so perfect and walk on eggshells to try to do everything right all the time. And that you have the privilege of repair. Of course, we want to commit ourselves to not doing harm in the first place, but knowing that we're human and that we're going to cause harm sometimes, that we want to become masters at repair. And an apology, a sincere, heartfelt apology,
I'm so sorry that I spoke to you with that tone in my voice, or that the blame and judgment that I just laid on you, and please give me a chance to rephrase that. But I want to tell you something that I think is even more important than the apology. As what I have just learned from this in this moment, I feel is going to hold me in good stead going forward. And I'm really committed to not doing this again. Because I see that it hurt you, what I just said or what I just did. It hurt you. And I'm committed to non-harm. And it hurts me, too, to be my lower self rather than my higher self. And so the apology is a good beginning, and some people just say, I'm sorry, and then they think it's all supposed to be fine again. No. People want to know, did you really learn something from this, so you don't just do it again and say, I'm sorry again, and then do it again and say, I'm sorry again. So I hope that's helpful to you. Please.
Say, going off of that, so what do you do if you get into a situation where that continues to happen, where they genuinely apologize and then there's no constructive action behind that? At what point do you just, are you like, so are you not going to actually put in effort, or how do you navigate through that?
This is one of the places where
Repeat the question.
Just let the video know what she just said.
Yeah.
The question is, if you get into that situation where someone is continuously hurting you and then apologizing for it and claiming to genuinely take action, but then you don't see that action reflected within the relationship, how do you navigate through that?
Thank you, that's a great question, because that is not a complete resolution of the situation if all you get is an apology. An apology is certainly an important step in the process at those times when somebody has sincere remorse about what they've done. Some hurtful words have slipped out in a moment of anger that you really want to take responsibility for. But if it doesn't go beyond the words, and you don't see a shift in the behavior, and there's repeated instances in which the same transgression is made, then the apology is meaningless. Because what an apology implies is that I have regret and remorse about what I did. I'm sorry, and I have an intention and a desire to make things better, to restore us. We had a break in our trust level here because of what I did, and I want to restore us back to a high level, or maybe even higher. And this is what I'm willing to do. This is what I've learned. This is what I'm committed to. If a person takes that step, and it feels like there's a sincere commitment, then obviously you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, in the case that you're talking about, where you get the apology, you get the promises, you get the words, but there's no consistency in the follow-up action, you got a real problem there. And at that point, that's where self-trust comes in. I've got to trust myself enough to know how many more chances am I willing to give this person before I start to feel like I'm putting myself in harm's way. How much more am I willing to tolerate this? And there's no generic answer to that question. For some people with some transgressions, it's like, you screw up more than once, and I can't, that's it for me. With other people, with other situations, it could be more. But to make amends, to make the situation complete, there's got to be follow-up that goes beyond just the apology.
And what
You've got to see some behavioral results in their way of being in the relationship.
What I want to add to what Charlie's saying is that we don't serve ourselves if we let them off the hook. We don't honor ourselves if we don't report out how deeply distressing this is to us. The kind of
lowering of the trust, the kind of doubt and hopelessness and despair that starts to invade our thoughts. That this could be moving into the deal breaker category. That I'm thinking I may not be able to stay with you because I don't trust that your word is good because of the pledges and the promises that you made to me. If you would break it on this, you would maybe break the other agreements that we have now, or agreements that we make in the future. And I think sometimes the partner doesn't realize what thin ice they're skating on, how close they are to being given their dismissal papers, do you know? Because we haven't voiced what Charlie called going on the record, I think is really important. This is not a small thing to me. This is a huge thing to me. This could be a deal breaker for our relationship. I am so distressed about this. And sometimes people don't go that extra distance to have that deep communication. And people break up all the time, and one of them is stunned. You know, I thought the relationship was going pretty good, and the other person's really suffering. One of the things that we do when we teach our workshops is we have people do an assessment from 0. You know, I'm about ready to leave this relationship, it's just not working for me, to a 10. Man, I'm blissed out in this relationship. I hit the jackpot with this one. This is as good as it could be. We always challenge people to write a bigger scale. There's more to be experienced. And where are you on that continuum? There are people who are so disconnected that one person can be at a 0 and the other person thinks the relationship's at 10. Do you know? They're not communicating deeply enough to know that the person who's distressed and unhappy and about ready to give up and walk away, do you know, the other person's left out of the loop. Now, they have some responsibility that they're kind of unconscious and they're not asking the right questions, but the person who's suffering in silence has responsibility too because they weren't reporting out. And we see relationships go down the tubes all the time because the person who was distressed didn't really make it clear what they must have to thrive.
So silence can be as hurtful as anger.
Of course.
Yes.
We call that the violence of silence. Do you know? It can be very destructive and eroding the substrate of the relationship because of all the withholds, with all the sucking it up, with all the, you know, trying to overlook, trying to forgive, and then you said, I can't take it anymore, I'm out of here. That's exactly right.
Charlie touched on it a little. Share with us about patterns in relationship.
Well, patterns are systems of behavior and attitudes that we have learned that begin at the beginning of our lives. And it has to do with, it's kind of like a shorthand way of knowing how to respond to situations. And we learn that from observing the way other people in our lives, usually our parents and people of authority, how they respond, and we adopt some of those same behaviors because it gives us a feeling of being aligned with the people whose approval we need. So when we use the term patterns, we're usually referring to defensive patterns. That is protective means through which we respond to or try to prevent risk, loss, danger. So a defensive pattern could be that when somebody gets angry at me, I get scared, so I want to kind of diffuse their anger by anticipating or understanding what they need, and I will accommodate them so they won't get too upset with me. So that's a pattern of accommodation. Some people develop patterns of the opposite, which is intimidation.
Bullying.
One of the ways that I'm going to make sure that I protect myself is I'm going to present myself in a way that's threatening to people so they won't want to mess with me. So when we're talking about patterns, we're talking about defensive stances that we take that are designed to protect us and designed to make it more likely for us to get our needs met. The problem with patterns is that they're automatic and they kick in without any conscious choice on our part. We've internalized them, integrated them in our way of being so fully that they automatically just come up and we don't think about it. And some of the patterns can be very destructive. They can really damage, we might protect ourselves, but it could be at the cost of trust in the relationship.
I would like to give you an example of one of the patterns that I feel is the most destructive and puts the relationship most at risk. I don't want to talk about it. You ever had anybody say that to you? I'm not talking about it? It'll get you in a lot of trouble. And of course the relationship has to grow and the trust has to grow and the rapport has to grow and the communication skills have to grow until there is nothing that's the no-fly zone. I used to have a couple that I worked with years ago that they would call it the no-fly zones, the areas where they couldn't talk. And they wanted to get rid of their no-fly zone, so there was no taboo subject. So that is a legitimate, honest, reasonable goal to hold, that if you want to have a good partnership with somebody, that you don't have any subjects, eventually, that are off limits, that in some way, shape, or form, you can talk about anything that's important to you. Please.
How can like people who are in a relationship improve upon like time management and allocating time for their significant other while still being able to balance like work, school, and family, any other things that have come up in life?
Great question. So I'll repeat the question. How can we get good at time management so that we can handle the competing urgencies of our life? Academic, professional, making money, paying the bills, doing the housework, activities, volunteer activities, political, volunteering for the church and so forth, and still make a romantic partnership a very high priority. And all these highly successful couples, no matter how busy they are, a lot of them had really big careers, some of them were still raising kids, they made their relationship a very high priority. It was one of the leading characteristics of these highly successful couples. And I think it's all in the commitment. That no matter, we have one couple in this book. They're disguised in the book. They're one of the few couples who asked to be disguised. So in the book they have 12 kids. In actuality, they have 13 children. And if these people, Charlie and I interviewed this couple in person. Some of them we had to do on the phone. It was a whole lot more fun to interview them in person. But when we left after that interview, we looked at each other because we still had kids home at the time. We said, we will never, ever, ever say we don't have time for our relationship. If that couple with 13 kids could find time to prioritize their relationship, we can do it. And so it's really, knowing how essential it is, energy in, energy out. It's where we put our most focused attention that's going to get the biggest reward. Don't you see it in your academic world? If there's a teacher that really stirs you up and you're enthusiastic about that teacher, you want to do the homework, you want to read all the texts, you want to really learn the subject matter, so you put more into it, and you end up getting the best grade usually in that class. And the one that's boring and you're just doing it to get the damn credits and get it over with, you don't put that much into it, you don't do such a good grade in that. You just pass and get it behind you. So, the research is really clear. One of the subjects that we teach on is happiness. People get the biggest bang for their buck, and their happiness is from their closest relationships. And the people that have good, thriving marriages get the biggest advantage. And one of the reasons that they got that happiness advantage is because they put a lot of time and attention into their partnership. Do you want to say anything?
I've always been curious about why is it that some people, despite the fact that their schedules are no lighter than most other people's schedules, why do some people manage to find the time to nurture the relationship? Why are some people willing to make sure that that responsibility is included on their plate? And other people don't. Other people see that that's like, after I get this done and handle this one and take care of this business here and do this, then if I've got time, you know, we'll nurture our relationship. We'll spend more time together. And of course, you never have enough time. It falls off of the plate. And yet there are some people, maybe they have even fuller schedules, and they manage to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I've observed is that the people who do manage to do it know something that the people who don't do it don't know. And what they know is that the benefit that they're going to get from this investment of time and energy is going to bring back to them a higher quality of life than any other domain of their life. Not that they should neglect their work or their other responsibilities. No, they shouldn't neglect it. But the reason that so many people opt to invest more of their precious life energies in work than in relationships is because they have a belief that that's where the biggest path is going to be. Because at work, I know I'm going to get some very serious rewards for that. I'm going to get money. I'm going to get recognition. I'm going to get a feeling of competence. I'm going to get things that I can see that I really want. What am I going to get in a relationship? Most people don't have any idea what it is that they stand to get from a relationship. Relationship, a primary relationship, is the hub of the wheel. Everything falls off of that. The better your relationship is, the better your relationships with people in general are, the better off your life you're going to be in your life. It's a no-brainer. It's a fact. All research bears that out. But most people don't really get that. They don't believe it. They don't trust it. They really think that, you know, I'm going to make an investment and the best return I can get is money. Not true. In fact, research also shows that if you have a good, solid relationship, statistically you're going to be making more money, significantly more money, than people who don't have it.
And have better health, and live longer.
So it's a misunderstanding about where the best place is to invest your energy, and a misunderstanding about what you really do stand to gain. In your book, which most of you haven't come to, the very last, the 101st thing in the book is that what you stand to gain from creating an optimal relationship is infinitely greater than what you can even imagine. Now think about that for a second. You know, and think about what your greatest hope would be. Like if I really created the relationship of my dreams, it was really great. What would that be like? What would it be characterized by? What would it feel like? How would it be? And then multiply that by 10. And you can't even see what more it could be. And I want to guarantee you that's a possibility.
Right.
And it's not just for people who have had a certain level of education or who have had a certain upbringing in their families. It is possible for most people. I won't say it's possible for everybody, because some people have experienced some damage, some pain, some trauma, crises in their lives that have not been able to get over, and that is going to limit them to some degree. But I'm talking about the very vast percentage of people, like way up in the 90s. It is possible for them. And when you really see that, you know what? You find ways to find the time to reprioritize where you're putting your energies. It's a fact. That's the way it works.
And I'm totally with everything that Charlie's saying. And the point that I want to make is, if you're really showing up and you're really there, full heart, do you know, and it's high quality time, a little bit goes a long way. We both have busy schedules, but we make a point every morning to have a meaningful connection with each other, and that can sustain us all day, do you know, if we don't have any connection. And if Charlie's on the road or I'm on the road, we make a concerted effort to have a meaningful connection with each other by phone. So it doesn't necessarily have to be long, but it has to be meaningful. And it's important not to rely on, well, we had an in-depth connection yesterday, so I get a pass for today or for the rest of the week. Quantity and quality both matter. Yeah.
So we don't have a lot of time, so you started with differences.
Yes.
And can you speak a little bit to creating that space to hold differences?
Great question. So she's asking about differences and creating the space to hold the differences. So we belabored this point about the opposites attract. You're likely to be involved with somebody who's really different than you are. And you may want to fix them up a little bit, do the home improvement plan to see if you make them more like you. And that'll backfire because people want to be respected for who they are. If they're interested, they'll ask. And so taking on the commitment to grow ourselves, to be tolerant and to be accepting and to not be so full of judgment and to work with our own fear that their differences, oh my God, they're so different from me. I know that we're a hopeless mismatch. It's sure to going to be break us up. Do you know? That we don't believe everything we think. That we question that. Can we be our own unique, different people, and the tolerance and the acceptance and the respect for the differences and the curiosity to learn about that way of thinking, that style of being in the world. Genuine curiosity and wonder can create that big space for the differences to be there. Would you like to say something about differences?
We have a couple of friends who, about 30 years ago, wrote a book called "Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You?" That's really kind of the question that I think we're looking at in the whole, in the area of creating enough space to be able to live with the differences. Because the differences are going to be there, and there are risks to take. Like Linda mentioned, the fear, one possible fear is the fear that we're just not compatible enough, that we're not going to be able to make it. The counterpart of that fear is I'm going to lose myself. I'm going to try so hard to fit in to this person's expectations that I'm going to lose myself. And doing that, creating that space, no matter how you do it, no matter where you are on the spectrum, it's going to be scary. And what quality do you need to have developed within yourself in order to confront that kind of fear? What's the quality that will help you?
Please.
The courage and confidence.
Sure. Courage and confidence.
Yeah. So you have to be able to, again, look at what do I need to grow within myself in order to be able to have what it requires to have the presence and the confidence and the courage that I'm going to need to do this work. Because knowing, this is why self-help books usually don't help that much. They tell people what they need to do, but what they don't say enough about is how you're going to deal with your resistance to doing it. How you're going to deal with the fear that comes up when you try to step out of your comfort zone. And the answer to that is, I got to strengthen my trust in myself to be able not to make sure everything turns out well. My trust in myself that no matter how it turns out, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to let myself get lost in somebody else's picture of who I need to be.
Yeah, it's very important to know which end of the spectrum you're on. Because we all have both of the two major fears, the fear of abandonment and the fear of being controlled, but there usually is one that's dominant. You know, and those kind of people tend to get together. So if you know which end of the spectrum that you're on, you're empowered to be able to deal with it more effectively.
Can you give an example of how you dealt with?
I'm the fear of abandonment person. You know, I'm the connector. Did you see at the very first moment that I put my arm around Alana? I love to be close. I would love to teach, you know, sitting in this lap. I'm a connector. I'm relationship oriented. So my greatest fear is to be abandoned, to be left, to be rejected, to not be valued. And so
Don't talk about my fear.
No, you
I'll
talk
talk
about
about
your fear.
Yeah, I'm more concerned about not losing myself. I'm on that end of the spectrum. So we got somebody here who, when she feels under stress or that she needs support, she comes in and she wants to connect with me. And like my impulse at those times is, whoa, I need my space, back off. So you can imagine that over the years, we've had a few challenges in those departments, and I'm pleased to say that I have learned a lot from Linda about connection, learned to appreciate it, learned to enjoy it, learned how to overcome my fear of getting lost, developed enough trust in myself to know that I can really deeply connect, we can connect, and then we can disconnect.
And
then
I've
we can connect and
learned
disconnect.
a lot from Charlie about being independent and standing on my own 2 feet and making my own decisions and turning to other people for connection and not leaning on him too hard. And I will be grateful all my days for learning more about independence and self-reliance and not quaking in fear all the time that the people who are important to me are going to leave me flat.
So there are significant differences that are going to show up in your relationships. And what we say about that, and this may be the last thing that we say before we close, vive la différence.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
You're bilingual.
I have some closing remarks that I would like to make.
Oh, hang on a minute, guys.
So, I went to a wedding last Saturday. Best wedding I ever went to in my life, and believe me, I've been to a lot of weddings. And what made this wedding so stunning and awe-inspiring to me was these 2 people who got married were in their 30s. The father of the groom told me, and I don't know whether he was exaggerating or whether this was literal. The next time I talk to him, I'm going to ask him. He said that the groom had dated over 300 women before he finally settled on this woman. Maybe it's accurate. Some people actually date that many people. With the internet full of all these dating sites, you can go through a lot of people. But maybe he was just speaking metaphorically. But they had grown up, and they're very different. She's an accountant and he's an artist. But because they had had so much life experience and recognized each other as the beloved for a lifetime, it was a very joyful experience because we were so happy to be there in the presence of such a beautiful ritual. And the officiant at the ceremony who led the ceremony was the first time he's ever conducted a wedding. And it was so heartfelt. He told the story of them meeting each other, of their falling in love, of their saying, I love you for the first time to each other, and for the proposal and the determination to have the wedding. And they had a half a dozen bridesmaids and groomsmen on both sides. The officiant of the wedding had made it his business to get to know all of them, spoke to them by name, how long they had been friends of the bride and groom, and what part they played in their life. So it was very personal and deeply touching ceremony. But I thought to myself, these two kids here, you know, even though they're in their early 30s, they're still kids to me because I'm so old. They have really done some work on themselves to know who they are. And they've had a lot of life experience. They know what their careers are going to be and what they're committed to, and they're planning to do family. And I cried through the whole ceremony, on and off. I was so choked up because I was so happy for them that they were getting off to a good start. And they were blessed to have, you know, family and friends. There were 200 people at the wedding. That they had family and friends that were supporting them. And the reason that I wanted to tell you about the wedding is because when I see young people like you, that's what I wish for you. I hope that you know who you are in a very deep way, and that you have a lot of experience in relationship and communication, so that when you finally do make your choice to take a chance on creating a partnership, if that's your path, it's not for everybody, but if you choose that you go into it with your eyes open, without the romantic myths running you, and that you're conscious about your choice. Because I think it's really the ticket to a great deal of happiness. So I wish that for you. And thank you, all of you, for your